minutes. I will try. Thank you very much. Let me quickly rush this thing, even though I know there are French translators, but I was told 30 minutes, but I'll try and finish in about 15 minutes. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, industry leaders, government representatives, partners, and friends of Africa's energy future. It is an honor to be here to speak about a topic that holds the key to transforming Africa's industrial trajectory, building an African refinery hub. Let me begin by framing the context. Africa produces approximately 7 million barrels of crude per day, though we consume only about 4.3 million barrels of petroleum products per day. And quite troubling, we refine just about 40% of that domestically. Most of this production is in Algeria, Egypt, and now Nigeria with the start of the Dangote refinery. In sub-Saharan Africa, we don't have more than 3 good working refineries. To compare Europe and Asia, they refine about 95% of their consumption. So while we produce plenty of crude, we still import about 120 million tons of refined petroleum products each year, and effectively exporting jobs and importing poverty into our continent. That's about $90 billion of market opportunity being captured by regions with surplus refining capacities. To put this in perspective, only about 15% of African countries actually have GDP greater than $90 billion. We are effectively handing over an entire continent's economic potentials to others year after year. Now, I must clarify, I'm not against global trade. On the contrary, I believe in the power of free markets and international collaborations. But trade should be rooted in the principles of economic efficiency, comparative advantage, and a fair playing field. And it defies logic and economic sense for Africa to be exporting raw crude only to re-import refined products. Products we are now more than capable of producing ourselves, closer to both source and consumption. So why is this happening? Why have we not been able to refine our own petroleum products at scale? Based on our experience, building the Dangote refinery, the largest single train refinery in the world, we encountered 3 broad categories of challenges, which is technical, commercial, and textual. So let me walk you through each one of them. The technical challenges, let me begin with this one. Let no one underestimate the complexity of building a world-class refinery anywhere in the world. As a matter of fact, we have one single equipment that weighs 3,000 tons, which is the first of that kind of equipment to land in the soil of Africa. These are among the most capital intensive and logically complex industrial facility ever built. To construct ours, we were actually the EPC contractors. We had to take the charge to be the EPC contractors because we couldn't get any EPC contractor that agreed to come and take this risk. They say Africa is very risky. They don't want to take the risk of coming to Nigeria to build a refinery. So we had to actually do that. We bought over 2,700, we created a company and also bought over 2,700 hectares of land, which is 7 times the size of Victoria Island, of which 70% of it was actually swamp. So we had to debush the land. Based on the data on climate change, we had to raise the land by about 1.5 meters. So we pumped 65 million cubic meters of sand from the sea. We installed over 250,000 piles of 35 meters each. Anything that you see in our refinery is standing on pipe. Millions of meters of piping, cabling, electrical wiring, and so on. One prominent company, which I shall not name, supplied us with faulty equipment, which I believe was intentional. The equipment was actually quite critical to the startup of the refinery, and without that, we couldn't have started the refinery. And that it took us 2 years to correct the various defects of commissioning that unit. And that actually reminds me of when we bought the refineries of Port Harcourt and Kaduna in 2007. The government took it back, and they are still not yet there. At peak, we had total over 67,000 people working at site, of which 50% of them are Nigerians. So coordinating around the clock across hundreds of disciplines of nationalities. Then, of course, we now came through COVID, of which actually set us back about 2 years. But I think we must be thankful to the government, because despite the COVID, China and India, based on the written note by the president then, may so rest in peace, they allowed us to operate and allow us to charter planes and bring in people to continue. So, but we continue at a very lower phase. But we persevered. We built not only the refinery, but also a seaport, because the existing port capacities in Nigeria couldn't actually handle over 60% of our equipment. And you can also imagine that we brought in 150,000 containers. A majority of them we had to go through Lome and keep bringing them, in. We also had over 2,600 of heavy equipment in the construction company, over 1,000 vehicles, and 330 cranes of 100 tons and above. We even actually built the world's largest granite quarry, because nobody could supply us with the quarry, which is about 10 million tons. But most of the hurdle actually, was assisted through the cooperation by NMDPRA to assist in terms of accelerating the construction. After overcoming the commercial challenges, after overcoming the technical challenges, we faced the second major hurdle, which is commercial viability. Once the refinery was ready, we now proceeded to line up working capital to commence operations. Exchange rates has gone up from $156 at inception of the project to $1,600 at completion. The interest rates were exorbitant, but we had no choice. We appreciate all the local and the international banks by standing with us. They really stood by us, and they have done very well. One of the first commercial shocks we came with was crude feedstock sourcing. At the project inception, it was reasonable to assume that in a country producing about 2 million barrels per day, securing crude would be least of our worries. But we were wrong. Rather than buying crude oil directly from the Nigerian producers at competitive terms, we found ourselves having to negotiate with international trading companies who are buying Nigerian crude and reselling it to us with hefty premiums. Of course, as we speak today, we buy about 9 to 10 million barrels of crude monthly from the United States and other countries. I must thank the NNPC for making some cargoes of Nigerian crude available to us from the start to date. They have done very well. But it's been very, very difficult with the IOCs. IOCs have been the most difficult in our journey. Even after securing the crude, transporting it became another bottleneck. Lifting schedules were constantly shifted by upstream operators, and we were hit with excessive port and regulatory charges. Skyrocketing port charges made about 40% of the total freight cost, meaning it costs 2/3 as much as chartering a vessel, with the crew, insurance, and fuel included. Meanwhile, refiners in India who purchase crude from all regions, even farther away, enjoy lower freight charges than we do right here in West Africa because they are not saddled with exorbitant port charges. This is not only in the oil industry. I mean, if you look at it now, I can go to New York, was just about $400 from London. But to go to Accra from Lomé, you pay $600. So I just want to say that so some of you that know what is happening, you can have a rethink. In terms of port charges, it is currently more expensive to load a domestic cargo of petroleum products from Dangote Refinery, as customers pay both at the loading point and also at the discharge point. But when they load from Lomé that competes with us, they pay only at the port of discharge. This is simply unfair and it is unsustainable. Then came the challenge of selling the refined products. Unlike Europe, which has adopted harmonized fuel specifications, Africa remains fragmented. Every country has its own fuel specification standard. The fuel we produce for Nigeria cannot be sold in Cameroon or Ghana or Togo, even though we all drive the same vehicles. The lack of harmonization benefits no one except, of course, international traders who thrive on arbitrage. For local refiners like us, it fragments the market and imposes unnecessary inefficiencies. To give one example, the diesel cloud for Nigeria is 4 degrees. Without going into technical details, this means that the diesel should work at a temperature of 4 degrees centigrade. Achieving this comes at a cost to us and limits the types of crude we could actually process. But how many places in Nigeria experience temperatures of 4 degrees? Other countries have a more reasonable range of 7% to 12% degrees. 7 to 12% degrees. This is low-hanging fruits which could be addressed by the regulators. Any regional pricing framework must address this wide variability in standards. And to make matters worse, we are now facing increasingly dumping of cheap, often toxic petroleum products, some of which are blended to substandard levels that will never be allowed in Europe or North America. Due to the price caps on the Russian petroleum products, discounted petroleum products produced in Russia or with discounted Russian crude find their way to Africa, severely undercutting our local production, which is based on full crude pricing. This has created an unlevel playing field. In most African countries, petrol and diesel are sold for about $1 net of taxes. In Nigeria, due to this unfair competition, this price is just about 60 cents, even cheaper than Saudi Arabia, which produces and refines its own oil. This is due to the fact that we are having too much dumping. To remain viable, we urge the governments across Africa to take deliberate steps, as the US, Canada, and EU have done, to protect domestic producers from unfair competition. Nigeria First policy, announced by His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, should apply to the petroleum product sector and all other sectors. Contextual challenges. Let me speak to the third and perhaps the most complex category of contextual challenges. Beyond infrastructural deficit, the most formidable challenge we faced was entrenched in rent-seeking within the petroleum value chain across many African countries. This sector has historically been a major avenue for corruption and rent-seeking, or rent extraction, really. When you build a refinery and disrupt that system, you are not just innovating, you are actually threatening powerful interests that will seriously fight back aggressively. Another major barrier is the offshore Lomé floating market, a uniquely African phenomenon. International traders maintain a floating storage of about 2 million tons of petroleum products just offshore Lomé. These were being sold at inflated prices, given the lack of local refining capacity. Immediately, the Dangote refinery became operational. They decided to crash prices. But make no mistake, those who profit from this system will do everything they can to prevent other refineries from emerging. The whole essence of Lomé is to ensure that no refinery operates in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, I don't see any new major refining project succeeding with the offshore Lomé market existing. The obstacle must be dismantled through policy alignment, regional cooperation, and above all, strong political will. Without political support, there is no way for any new large refinery to be built in our lifetime. What I want to say is that if that support is not there, we will not. In fact, the entire people who are here with us, none of us will see a new refinery being built in our lifetime. Opportunities ahead. And yet, despite these challenges, the opportunity is massive. When we entered into cement sector, Nigeria had a production capacity of less than 2 million tons per annum and was entirely reliant on imports of up to 2007. Nigeria actually was the second largest importer in the world after the United States of America. Today, thanks to our visionary investment, determined execution, and government support, we have over 52 million tons of capacity. That's just Dangote alone, without Bua, without Lafarge, without Mangal, across Africa, and will be at 60 million tons capacity by mid of next year. We are now net exporters of cement in Nigeria and other countries, and we are targeting an export of $500 million of cement and clinker by the year 2027. This is the same happening in petroleum refining. Today, Nigeria has actually become a net exporter of refined products. Actually, before I came on the podium, I asked my people how many tons we actually exported of PMS. In the last, from June beginning to date, we have exported about 1 million tons of PMS. This lasts, 50 days. We have now polypropylene. By the time at our full production, Nigeria can only consume 30% of our own consumption. And we did the same with urea. And urea, we're actually, producing now 3 million tons. Indorama producing 3 million tons. So really, for you to know, Nigeria is actually catching up, is going to beat Egypt in the next 16 months. And will be the biggest exporter of urea in Africa. This is a historic turnaround. And with our LPG production of 2,500 tons per day, we are working to encourage more homes to increase the LPG consumption or utilization. And we are just getting started. Very soon, the refinery will be listed to give all Nigerians the opportunity to become shareholders. We are open to partnerships with African governments, private investors, and regional institutions. Our vision is simple but ambitious. Africa should refine all the petroleum products it consumes right here on the soil of Africa. Closing. Before I conclude, let me take this opportunity to address concerns around monopoly and dominance. The reality is that for too many people who have both the means and the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to our nation's growth, choose instead to criticize from the sidelines while investing their wealth abroad, adding little to Nigeria's real economy or Africa's economy. We have chosen to bet on Nigeria, and we will continue to do so. So we should not allow dumping to destroy our manufacturing base like what it did in so many other industries like textiles and co. Others should be encouraged to build refineries if they are serious. I think encouraging other people to build refineries is the job of the NNDPRA and also the government. So, Engineer Farouk, I will rely on your leadership to make sure we encourage those people who have collected licenses that are not using. And I believe anybody who collected these licenses from you, either you cancel them or you put a penalty on a yearly basis so that they will return the license or they will build those refineries. In conclusion, the road to industrial self-reliance is not easy. It is full of obstacles, technical, financial, commercial, and political. But the reward are even greater: jobs, value retention, and economic transformation. Let us not squander the immense potential that lies beneath